Let's go back in time to 1932 as Converse brings you historic footage of the legendary original Celtics with whom all great professional teams are compared.
We have now taken over your radio.
Richie Guerin is about to show you the most important step in getting past a man. It's the first one.
And Oscar will inbound it. The men in green, the Milwaukee Bucks, that's Alcindor against Bellamy.
Has Jordan, Allen shakes, Gray gets two!
Gilmore on
Steph! Oh, brother!
lead, Toledo artists, you get 21.
4:28 to go in the first quarter for the Cow Palace. Here's Barry.
Jordan, open, Chicago with the lead!
Hello, and welcome back to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason Mann, and who is that I see? Rich Craich.
Yes.
Good to be back with you. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Well, congratulations to you, too, as well. We're both both married men now. I feel different.
Not to each other, but...
there's no problem. We decided to take this podcast thing to the next level. It's like, you know what? I talk to you every week anyway. Like, you know what? Let's do this whole thing, right? I mean,
might as well. We live in different cities, but you know that doesn't stop.
Long distance has never stopped us. No, it's never stopped us before, and it's not going to stop us now. So, yes. So. You came to Illinois.
We share a Twitter account for the podcast. So
right. You know, what's next? I mean, there's not much else left to, do. So why not? Yeah. So, and for tax purposes too, it's great. So, I mean, I can't wait to file taxes. So, yeah. But yes. Thank you for having me back. And I think I enjoyed the show a lot more when I wasn't on it because I got to listen to it. Because I don't I don't know how you feel about listening back to your own podcast, but I don't do that ever. So the ones that you've been doing, I've been like, oh, this is pretty nice. So this is nice. And like I enjoy it because now I can actually listen to you listen over again because I can't hear my own voice. Like it freaks me out beyond belief. Like I just can't do it. But I've been able to listen, and it's been great stuff. Yeah, I don't know. Some people love it. Some people will go back and immediately listen to something they just recorded. I never have listened to a single thing I've ever recorded. I hate it.
I generally do listen to mine, although I don't like the sound of my own voice. You have a nice voice, so I feel like I enjoy listening to your voice better than mine. I've kind of gotten used to the voice just because I've done enough podcasts. Obviously, you've done a lot of podcasts too, so it doesn't really bother me to do. But I sort of listen for quality control just to make sure I didn't screw anything up too bad, or for just to think about how I can do better in the future and that kind of thing. But occasionally I listen to something to see what we talked about because occasionally I do forget if we talked about something. So anyway, we are we're going to take a slight break from WrestleMania, although we're going strong with that, and we've got we're a little bit more than halfway done with the series, so we've got a few more episodes in the works. But we're going to take a little break because we've had some important NBA news of the past week. We've had Steph Curry, he suffered a knee injury that is only going to keep him out, for at least 2 weeks. They're going to reevaluate in 2 weeks and see. It was looking like it could be more serious, and of course, who knows? It could end up keeping him out for longer, or if things go poorly, perhaps his team could get eliminated. So they've kind of made us think about some examples of other instances of significant players who sustained an injury that arguably could have swung a series. So we decided to kind of compile a few that were a few that we definitely think very much there's a good case that they did, and then a few others that we'll talk about briefly that a few maybe, a few not. We're just going to kind of go through some of the ones that are sort of popular and just talk about what we think about the effect that those had on NBA history.
Yeah, essentially, I mean, we're the ones that, like Jason mentioned, the ones that we're going to really focus on are the ones that completely altered a team's chances of winning a title. In terms of a team that we used a criteria as well, which we'll go over a little bit, of teams that we thought, either had a chance to get, to the NBA Finals, had a chance of winning the championship. And then we're also going to go over, like you said, a bunch of other ones that are just kind of more or less like kind of a history of sort of major playoff injuries to really good teams. Like there are plenty. I mean, of course, we could have we could be talking forever about, injuries in the playoffs, but we're trying to look at, star players, near stars, guys that really altered their team's chances of winning a championship by getting hurt. And a lot of them we're going to try to focus on injuries that happen sort of around the playoffs as well, because there are many cases, of course, of like a guy getting hurt in midway through the season and then that sort of derailing the chances. We want to just kind of focus on this particular case because as we saw, unfortunately, it was when we decided to do this, it was just Steph Curry who sprained an MCL. We weren't really quite sure what that was quite yet. We weren't sure if he was out for the whole season or what was going on. And then the basketball gods or devils blessed us with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin as well. And not that, I think there's two different planes there, whereas I think, 2 weeks without Steph Curry is probably a little bit more for the Warriors playoff title chances than the Clippers, but you could make a case of this Clippers team. I mean, honestly, look at this Clippers team without Blake Griffin and without Chris Paul. It is actually, don't look at it. I would advise, and your doctor would probably advise not to look at it. So they blessed us with two more gigantic injuries that happened in the playoffs too. So we're not going to talk as much about those because I don't think they're on the same level as Steph, but just to let you know sort of our frame of mind of why we decided to do this and why we decided to do this topic. So
yeah, and I mean, of course, Steph's injury. I mean, Steph is had one of the greatest seasons in NBA history on the team with the
right.
greatest winning percentage in NBA history, 73 wins. So that's obviously, even though Chris Paul is an amazing player and Blake Griffin's really good too, it's obviously a different context.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll go through a few briefly that we think were meaningful, that were worth a little bit of discussion. Then we got a few others that kind of fit that elite criteria that you're talking about. But first is Bill Russell in the 1958 finals. We're bringing it back to Bill Russell.
We're taking a diversion away from Bill Russell. All right, Bill Russell.
Yes, Bill Russell. And Adam and I talked about this when we talked about the Celtics and Hawks rivalry. But in 1958, the Hawks actually beat the Celtics in a 6-game series. And Russell injured his ankle in Game 3 while attempting to block a Bob Pettit shot. He missed 2 games in the series, 4 and 5, although Boston actually did win Game 4. The Hawks won it in 6 games, and they edged the Celtics in Game 6 with behind 50 points from Bob Pettit. And the Hawks won their 4 games in this series by a combined 8 points. So obviously a very thin margin there. And if Russell had been healthy, there's a very good chance. I mean, the Celtics beat the Hawks, 4 out of 5 finals, and wasn't particularly close. So for the most part, the 57 finals was very close. But after that, the Celtics were clearly the better team. So I think there's a good chance that Bill Russell would have gotten that 12th ring, which I know desperately would change everything for him.
Would really get him a good resume, because right now it's like you're okay, you're up there, but yeah, that 12th would have really kind of sealed the deal as far as my legacy, or if I could count him as an elite player in this league, and it's just not quite there yet, but. You got to get more rings. Get some rings. Get some rings, Bill. All right, come on.
Yeah, 6 out of 6 for Jordan. You'd have 12 out of 12 for Russell. 11 out of 12 will have to suffice.
It's okay. Yeah, 12 out of 12 would be better, but it's all right.
Yeah. So, and then we have Billy Cunningham in the 1968 Eastern Division Finals. The Celtics taking on the 76ers, who they had a big rivalry with. You and I are going to do an episode on this coming up in the WrestleMania series, so we're not going to get too deep into it. But basically, Cunningham was a 6th man for the Sixers at that point, but was kind of growing into a star. Would soon be the team's best player, probably the team's 2nd or 3rd best player at the time, and would later be a ABA MVP and a top 50 all-time player. So very important guy, and did not play in this series because of a broken right wrist. This was a year after the Sixers had dethroned the Celtics to break up the streak of 8 straight championships. But the Celtics were able to win this series very
That choke artist Bill Russell, man. Jeez. Why don't you win the big one there, Chief? All right, come on.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of choking, the Sixers took a 3-1 lead in this series, but fell in 7 games. And also injured in this series, Wilt had a partial tear of a calf muscle of his right leg, a strain in his right thigh, and an injured right toe. Wally Jones had injured knee cartilage. Luke Jackson had a pulled hamstring muscle. Hal Greer had an injury in his right knee. So these are basically 5 of the 6 top players in in the game, and 3 of those players, including Cunningham, were top 50 all-time players. So in the initial top 50 list in 1997 that we've talked about many times. So so those are pretty bad, and that's definitely one where I think that changes NBA history a lot, because there's a good chance that if Cunningham were there, the Sixers win that series. There's probably a pretty good chance that if the Sixers win and make the finals, or at least win a championship, which they would have been favored in that situation, that they can kind of potentially build a dynasty rather than things falling apart and wanting to leave and that sort of thing, and then them being a 9-win team in 5 seasons later. So. It's hard, because there were definitely some of that behind-the-scenes strife with Wilt and management and some of the teammates and stuff, which we'll get into more in depth later. But I do think that this one, I think, there's a big domino effect that you can imagine pretty easily based on what happened here.
Absolutely.
And then a pretty famous one, Bill Walton in the 1978 Western Conference semifinals. This was the year after they'd won the 77 championship, very famous team, Walton leading the Trailblazers to the championship. And they got off to a really good start the next season, 50-10, and then Walton suffered a broken foot, still managed to win the league MVP that year despite missing basically most of the rest of the season. The team did not play well when he was gone. They went something like 10-14, and he returned to action for the playoffs, but was re-injured in the second game of the opening round against Seattle. Then Portland would lose the series, and Walton would then be out for the next season. There'd be a lawsuit from the team and team doctors. He'd end up going to the Clippers, and of course suffering a lot of injuries there, and really having 6 years of barely being able to play before managing to end his career with the Celtics. So a big domino effect there of and this in some ways I think is similar to Golden State, because I certainly don't expect this outcome from Steph, but the Trailblazers kind of capture people's imagination with their the way they played, their unselfishness, their passing. Walton was this tremendous talent who was kind of held back by injuries, but otherwise was just sort of this guy who people thought as a transcendent player. I kind of question a little bit of that myth, but I think that's something that we may tackle this summer. Hint, hint.
Yeah.
But I do think they were such a young team. Golden State was such a young team, and then they kind of emerge out of nowhere, like Golden State did a little bit last year. Golden State a much more accomplished regular season team, and. I do not expect Steph Curry to have the same kind of problems that Bill Walton did, certainly, hopefully not. But I do see a little bit of this. That's why I've always been a little bit suspect to try to for Golden State, try to keep my expectations tempered a little bit. They obviously look like they're on a path to be this juggernaut dynasty, awesome thing, but it can all go in just a very small amount of time.
Absolutely,
can return, and obviously if the Curry injury were more serious, or something that could threaten his career, that obviously could just derail all the good vibes that they've had. So
and there's things other than just simply basketball as well. There, in this Walton case, of course, the injury was a huge part of derailing it, but then also there was the issues, him and team management, him and the doctors or whatever. That can happen with any. We sort of think of it. Oh my God, Golden State's going to dominate the league for the next decade or whatever. Oh, nothing is going to stop them. But you know what I mean? There's nothing, and I'm not pointing out, or I don't. This is just a random example, but there's nothing stopping whatever Draymond Green this summer gets a bug and he's like, you know what, I don't want to play here anymore. I hate this play. You know what I mean? We've seen that plenty of times where it's just something happens, some sort of personality clash, things happen like that. So it is kind of hard to assume that this dynasty is just going to go on forever, or assume that any dynasty, because here's this Blazers team that you assume, oh man, that team, what was that? I mean, we obviously covered the breaks of the game in one of our podcasts, a year ago, that team was an average age of 20, it wasn't 24, 25, 20, somewhere in that range. It was just it was well, this team's going to dominate forever. There's no, who stops a 24-year-old team that's this good, or 26-year-old team that's that good? And we see, of course, that a lot of things could happen in a short period of time that can really sort of derail something, and this is a great case of that happening as well.
Yeah, a couple of things semi-related to this that I would mention. They're not nearly significant, but they're interesting trivia, at least to me. So, Kermit Washington and Lucius Allen in '77 for the Lakers. They were probably the team's second and third best players behind Kareem, and they missed the series against the Blazers because of injury. And I think we think of the Blazers as kind of this all-time team, but the Lakers were actually the better regular season team that year by a significant margin. And if they hadn't been missing their second or third best players, I think there's a chance that they were swept that season. I believe it's the Blazers. There's certainly a better chance that they have that they can at least make the competitive if they win that series, and that changes a lot of things. Lakers actually had the best record that season, and I believe they're 37-4 at home, which is pretty impressive record. And Lucius Allen also being injured for a series kept they lost a narrow 7-game series to the Celtics in '74. There was a very good chance that they could have won a championship. So another that could have. You can certainly imagine that having another title on Kareem's resume and another possible finals appearance in Kareem's resume
would have helped his resume too. Kareem. This whole episode is about building resumes, guys. And Kareem and Russell, I don't know, guys. Like, you had chances and you blew it. So I don't know.
Yes.
I mean, if you can't lead your team to a title, what good are you? Kareem and Wilt, or Kareem and Russell, and Wilt too. All these guys, they all suck. Win some titles, win some rings, guys. Come on, jeez.
Yeah, more rings. If you don't win a ring every single season of your career, you're a failure. I think it's fair to say.
I think that's a very fair way to assess a player's career. I agree with that.
Yes. So one that's mentioned in some of these lists is James Worthy in the '83 finals. This one. He played well. He was a rookie. He ended up breaking his leg right at the end of the season. They made it through the playoffs fine, but then they were swept by the '83 Sixers. And the Sixers were an incredibly dominant team. They at one point were threatening to win 70 games, which would have broken the record. And then they sort of eased off the last few weeks. They had a couple of injuries, and they limped a little bit into the regular season, but then in the playoffs they came very close to faux, only with one loss during that time. So I think I'm not really buying that that's necessarily going to swing. I mean, obviously James Worthy would be helpful, but other than maybe winning a game or two in that series, I just don't think that they were going to be able to handle the Sixers.
Yeah, the Sixers look like a team that, like, even in retrospect and even looking through the season and looking at all that looks like that was the dominant team of that year. So, I mean, yeah, you make a case that, they probably would have had, much better chance, but that was what sunk the entire Lakers season. I don't know if that's true, but it's worth noting for sure.
It's one that a lot of people kind of bring up as a as one of these, like, maybe it could have, but that one I'm not really buying. And so next we have, and then is interesting, and I think we may have discussed it when we talked about some of the Game 7s, but the '88 finals between Detroit and the Lakers. Isiah Thomas, of course, famously sprained his ankle in Game 6, managed to, on a sprained ankle, and you could see him, basically hopping around on one foot, able to score 25 points in a single quarter, and almost led them to win Game 6, which would have allowed them to win the series, but the Lakers ended up winning nearly 103-102 on a pair of last-minute free throws by Kareem. And then the next game, the Lakers win it by a very narrow margin, 108-105, on kind of a controversial final play where Magic ended up kind of knocking Isiah down, and Isiah only was able to score 10 points in that final game. So,
and that's what we talked about, where like the crowd just rushes the court. There's like 4 seconds left, and everyone's like, it's like, all right, we don't need those 4 seconds. That's fine. I guess we don't need those. All right, that's fine.
Yes. So I do think that one is I think there's a pretty good chance that one changes the course of history.
And you look at that Game 7. Yeah, absolutely. And you look at that Game 7, 108-105 with Thomas scoring 10 and obviously being hobbled by the ankle and all that stuff. I mean, you look at that narrow over margin with Isiah being pretty much a non-factor for that team as well. Is that sort of tells you, if he's at full strength, of course we don't know that for sure, but you can safely assume if he's at full strength, they have a way better chance of winning that game because they only lost by, the slimmest of margins, 108-105. So yeah, that's definitely one that definitely swung that series.
Yeah, for sure. And then the next year in the '89 finals, a rematch between the Pistons and the Lakers. This one I do not think would have swung the entire series, but Magic Johnson, he went down with a hamstring injury in Game 2. The Lakers ended up being, and he could not play in Game 3. I played very limited amount in Game 4. The Lakers were swept by the Pistons 4-0. I think the Pistons were a significantly better team, but obviously Magic being healthy would have, at least probably driven that to a couple more games. But I don't think that would have changed the balance. But if it would have changed the balance, then I guess if we swapped the '88s and '89 titles for the Lakers and the Pistons, that'd be weird, but I guess in the scheme of things, that's about other than we don't have any back-to-backs until Jordan. We lose both the Lakers and the Pistons back-to-backs if they trade championships from '88 and '89. So but beyond that, I guess the karmic balance of sports, however you
right.
I don't think was changed during that time. But it's interesting also Byron Scott, who used to play and not just be a mean coach, but he,
a bad coach. Did you say mean or bad? I said
mean.
Oh, okay.
I guess you could say bad.
He's bad.
Most people do. So I'm not disagreeing with them. So he was injured in practice before Game 1, and there. Kareem wrote a book on his final season, which this was the end of his career, and he wrote a book just basically being really mad at Pat Riley for before the finals, just implementing this really, really hard training camp regimen and driving everybody and making them run really fast. And he kind of felt like Riley had kind of become a little bit of a shrill dictator since the beginning of his 7 or 8 years since he had first become coach of the Lakers. And thought that the injuries were due in part to that kind of treatment. And I think their relationship is not very good to this day, which I know it's it's not like Kareem to hold a grudge, but that is unfortunate byproduct of what happened here.
Absolutely.
So what do we have next?
Next, Patrick Ewing in the 1999 finals, and this was famously the lockout shortened season of 98-99. Patrick Ewing, he suffered a partial tear of his left Achilles tendon in the series against the Pacers. The Knicks had beat the Miami Heat famously in the first round, then had dispatched the Atlanta Hawks 4-0. Then they were going up against the Pacers. They hated Indiana Pacers and Reggie Miller. Patrick Ewing, of course, as I said, suffered a partial tear of his left Achilles tendon. The Knicks were able to still beat the Pacers and then made it to the NBA Finals, but they were defeated by Tim Duncan, David Robinson, and the San Antonio Spurs 4-1. That's a great Spurs team, but that was a really, really good Knicks team. And I think that they were able to, still beat the Pacers and still, win a game in the finals without Patrick Ewing, who at this point was starting to slow down a little bit, but was still there. I mean, still, not the Patrick Ewing of old, but still a very important player there. Would they have won the title with Patrick Ewing? I don't know, but I think it would have definitely been a much closer series and would have probably went neck and neck, I think, because that Knicks team was very good outside of Ewing as well. So I think that would have played a big part in it because, especially when you look at the matchup against the Spurs, against Tim Duncan and David Robinson, having, your own 7-footer would have been a little nice as well. But of course, they were okay, but yeah, losing Ewing definitely hurt them.
Yeah, I do think the Knicks were kind of famously an 8th seed to the first 8th seed to make the finals, but there was some extenuating circumstances. There was the lockout season, and they had kind of gelled in the last half of the season. Mm-hmm. It would be interesting historically to have seen Ewing battle them against Duncan and Robinson. That would have kind of been a cool big man in the finals type matchup. And it would have been interesting for Duncan to kind of face somebody of of that generation, somebody famous of that past generation. Mm-hmm. He didn't really do that in the finals. He kind of battled basically his contemporaries. So, so that would have been interesting. I don't think it would necessarily have changed things. It's interesting because, of course, I think this is kind of the basis of the famous Bill Simmons Ewing theory of you lose the a guy isn't really a star and you lose him, and then everyone else is kind of better because you've built the team around this kind of flawed player type thing. So, which I think kind of haunted Ewing a little bit, but I don't think was really particularly fair.
No, I don't know as well, because we saw, and you mentioned the gelling of that team was a big important part as well, because you have a guy like a Marcus Camby who's still super young, and you could tell if you look at his stats throughout the year as it was going on, it was more and more figuring out, as most young big men do. They don't come into the league and immediately go, oh yeah, this is easy, I know what I'm doing. And you got a guy like an Allen Houston who was finally sort of embracing the I'm the leader of a team sort of thing, which again, I don't know if that's necessarily because Ewing got hurt, but I think you can sort of see that building throughout the year. So yeah, I don't subscribe to that theory much either, but it's whatever. Bill's made a career from doing stuff like that. So there you go. I'll move on now. 2003 Western Semis. 2003 is a very cursed year. We'll do two here, but you have Chris Webber and the Sacramento Kings. This is in the Western Semifinals. A second game of the 2003 series against the Mavericks, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Webber suffered a major knee injury. He was running down the lane untouched and just immediately collapsed into a pile. And when that kind of happens, this isn't very good. And that basically, for all intents and purposes, really kind of ended Webber's career as being, that dominant star. He was able to still score, but the explosiveness was gone after that. And more in this year, in 2003, it shattered the Kings title hopes. They won 59 in the regular season. Of course, the year prior, they had, the famous series with the Lakers. It was a franchise and a team that sort of looked like they had a chance to maybe not be a dynasty, but always be sort of the pesky guys there and maybe win a title one way or another, at some point to break through and win that title. This, of course, shattered their hopes. They would go on to lose in 7 games. Mike Bibby and Peja Stojakovic did as much as they could and were sort of emerged as the new stars of the team in Webber's wake, but the Mavericks ended up beating them and then sort of moving on to the next round, where I guess I can just move into this one, where Dirk Nowitzki for the Dallas Mavericks in the 2003 Western Conference Finals also got hurt. He went down with a knee injury midway through the fourth quarter in Game 3. Don Nelson wasn't quite sure if he would play again in the series. There were questions how bad the injury was. He ended up not playing anymore. And Dallas, even though they won 60 in that regular season, they fell 4-2 to the Spurs, who then would go on to the finals. So it's interesting that 2003 you sort of see two series, the karma that you mentioned. Webber goes down with the knee injury, and then Dirk. Of course, Dirk's wasn't nearly as serious. It was one of those where they weren't quite sure if he would play, if he would not, but he ended up not being able to play. But that was a really good Mavericks team. I think people sort of forget that was, definitely the best of the Nash-Dirk years, because the next year they would go and they would acquire Anton Jameson and Antoine Walker, and then things got a little weird, and then Nelson was out, and there was a lot of transition period until they would eventually make the finals a few years later. But this, I think, of the Nash-Dirk teams was far and away the best.
Yeah, they were a much better defensive team than they had ever been in any of those other years. And the Kings were really good too. I mean, the Kings won 59. The Mavericks won 60. I mean, that was there were a lot of. The Spurs were really good that year. The Lakers were pretty good that year. I mean, so that there were some pretty heavy contenders out there in the West. And in retrospect, the Spurs kind of got lucky that year to obviously Dirk getting hurt and avoiding the Kings potentially if they'd been able to beat the Mavericks. So that's a that's sort of some interesting what ifs there.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
To 2004, Karl Malone. So the thing that's kind of forgotten about, 2004 is famous for the Shaq and Kobe relationship being torn, breaking up permanently. They'd added Karl Malone and Gary Payton famously, and Karl Malone actually really fit in well when he played, and this was the first year of his entire career where he actually got hurt, in missed significant time. They were 20-5 when he got hurt. They ended up when he came back later in the season. They were 14-4 when he was a starter. So they were 34-9 with him as a starter, and played really well in the postseason. As well, he had 30-13 in a closeout game against Houston, and then was hurt again and was extremely limited in the playoffs and could not play in the final game, which ended up being the final loss to Detroit, which was a big upset at the time. People thinking Detroit didn't really have a chance, but in retrospect, that Detroit team was a lot better than people realized at the time, and they completely they beat the Lakers and tore apart the Lakers. And I think just based on how well Malone was playing when he was healthy, I do think that could have made a difference. I mean, it was only a 5-game series, so the Lakers were really lucky to win that one game, but I do think that there's a chance that, at least goes to 7. I think there's definitely a pretty good chance that changes things.
Well, I mean, if you look at and then it's not like they face, stiff, no competition in getting to those finals too. And you look at that, and they really did well in the entire. I mean, they beat Houston in the first round, beat a really good San Antonio team, the defending champion San Antonio Spurs in the second round, and then an awesome, really, really, I mean, the best Timberwolves team of Kevin Garnett's entire run there. That's at their peak powers of that Timberwolves team. That's a really good, crew to go through to finally get it to the Pistons. And then, of course, famously that it all kind of unraveled in that final series. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good case that if Karl Malone's at full strength, at least putting that game to, like you said, a 7 games or even a 6 competitive 6 makes all the sense in the world. Do they win the title? That's hard to say. It's, kind of revisionist history, but that they would definitely have made it a much better series than it ended up being had Malone been there. I think that's unquestioned.
I mean, we are, in fairness, we are doing revisionist history. So
yeah, that's what we do. that's literally the point of this podcast, or this particular podcast, but this particular episode. But yeah, that's fine.
Yes. We got a couple in 2005 as well. And, the first one, Wade and Shaq, I kind of had forgotten about this. That Wade. He suffered a strained rib muscle in Game 5 of the conference finals against the Pistons, who, of course, won the championship the year before. Then he couldn't play in Game 6 and then was limited in Game 7. And the Heat lost the series in Game 7 after they had led 3 games to 2, and they had a lead, in fact, in Game 7 and lost that series. And Shaq didn't miss time, but he had a deep thigh bruise, and they ended up losing the game and losing the series, obviously. So they did end up, picking it back up in 2006 and winning the title then. But that was sort of, that's sort of an interesting one to me. I don't know if they're beating the Spurs that year, because that Spurs team was pretty impressive. But that's I kind of forgotten about the injuries there that kind of definitely shifted that series.
Yeah, I always forget. I mean, I don't know why. Maybe it's probably because when you see any montage of like Dwayne Wade's career, or Shaq's career, or the Miami Heat, you always see like Shaq in his little press conference or whatever screaming about coming to the Heat, and then like Wade jumps in his arms and it's like, we won. Like I always sort of think that like Shaq came there and then immediately they won. I forget there was this one year under Stan Van Gundy that they and of course this was after this series is when O'Neal kind of publicly was like, this Van Gundy guy, I don't know, and like he re-signs with Miami. Pat Riley comes down from the rafters next year, and then obviously the rest is history for them. But yeah, I always forget that there was that Wade Shaq year before they won the title, because it always just seems like Shaq came there and then immediately they won. And I going back and researching this, I went, oh yeah, right, there was that the Stan Van Gundy years and this injury year. But yeah, whether they were a team that was going to probably win the finals, I don't know. It probably took that next year where they kind of coalesced a little bit more, added a few different parts, and of course Riley coming in a big part of that as well. But yeah, you can make a case that they would have at least at least changed the complexion of the Western or the Eastern Conference Finals and maybe the NBA Finals as well if they were both healthy. But
it's funny that that Heat team, that rise and fall was really dramatic. I mean, they fell apart very quickly after they won the title too. I mean, they suffered some injuries in the 2007. I think Wade was hurt a lot of that year, and then they barely made it into the playoffs, and they lost in the first round to the Bulls, I think. So,
yeah.
And then, in 2008, I think is when the Shaq trade happened. So, I mean, that really, and they were like a lottery team for a year, and then the decision happened. But
that's Miami, man. Yeah, no, that like you talk about that fall, and the thing was too. I remember in that Bulls series, and that's if you've seen the famous Alonzo Mourning, gif of him, sort of shaking his head, and the score is like some ungodly number, like the Bulls are winning by 40 or something like that, and it was just like they kind of all looked at each other like, man, well, that's that of that. Like we're all too old. Like we suck now. Like that's we suck. All right. And then like they did. They just like then they was like, all right, well that's over. And then everybody sort of moved on. And then real quickly they came back up. Yeah. So that's
Anton Walker had one good year. Jason Williams. I guess Jason Williams was all right for a while.
Yeah.
I mean they had a lot of guys who had one really good year and then in 2006 and then couldn't really replicate it. So
and then they had the weird like Jermaine O'Neal years and stuff. It's like you forget that. Like I saw an image of like Jermaine O'Neal on the Heat not that long ago, and I was like, what? When? I don't remember that. Like no, that never happened. You cannot convince me Jermaine O'Neal ever played for the Heat. That never happened.
We have video evidence.
No, we don't. No, you don't. Find it.
All right,
I dare you. Okay, sorry.
Never mind.
Thank you. Joe Johnson, 2005 Western Conference Finals. This is an interesting one as well.
He was famous.
Yes, yeah. So he's the Suns' starting shooting guard this year. Really, I mean, this is a great Suns team as well. They hadn't quite. Yeah. I don't know if they were quite at that level where they'd be, the next year or so. But this is a really, 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 really solid team with him as the shooting guard. This is his career year as well, scoring 21.2 points per game. Also, a really awesome 57.1% from three, which is just incredible. And of course, parlayed that into lots of monies from the Atlanta Hawks. But during the first 5 playoff games of the year, he averaged 21.2 points per game. So he's just a guy that was just on fire for that Phoenix team who looked good. Whether they were a title team, we'll see. But a really, deep, fun, quick, pace team and really just efficient as well. He fractured his eye socket and sustained a concussion, and he missed the remainder of the second round series against Dallas, and then they were still able to win that, but then he missed the first few games against the Spurs in round 3, and it never really quite got back for that team. And then for him as well, he returned. He scored some points, but his efficiency was gone a little bit because he was wearing a mask, and I remember at the time he was even saying, I can't shoot with this mask on. I just can't get used to it. And of course, just coming out of nowhere, it's not like you get a few games to sort of get used to it. It's like, all right, well, put the mask back on, and we're facing this, 2005 Spurs in the playoffs, and that just didn't work out, and he ended up moving on to greener pastures. I don't know, which is good. Greener as in money pastures, maybe not as in
he got 7 All-Stars out of it.
Yeah, exactly. So go Joe Johnson. But
yeah. It's interesting because, Joe was at one point like a sought-after young player who people were like excited about, and thinking like he had this exciting future, and a lot of people really wanted him to stay with the Suns because he worked so well in that role. They actually filled it pretty well. I mean, getting other guys to kind of, they didn't really end up needing him. They were fine without him. I mean, they had some really good teams afterward. I do think this team actually had the best record of any of those Suns teams because they lost to Murray the next year, so they actually only won like 54 games. So they made a pretty good playoff run though, and I don't know. I don't. Because Joe, he was like their 4th most important player. I mean, behind Nash and Stoudemire and Marion. So I mean, this one it could have swung it, but I just think that more than likely the Spurs were going to win that series anyway. It's possible, that they were a better regular season team, but my guess is that this one is it's important, but not quite at that changing who the champion would have been level.
Right. I agree.
And then next we have Yao Ming in 2009. Actually, McGrady was also missing this playoff series. I think the Rockets were actually without their 3 best players in this series, and somehow they were able to take the champion Lakers to 7 games. So it was a really weird kind of thing. This was basically the end of the Yao McGrady experiment because McGrady was traded the next season, and Yao, I think he came back and played like a handful of games, but then couldn't. They realized he couldn't play, and then he ended up having to retire soon after. So. But this is probably the best Rockets team. That they could have had. I mean, they really were a strong regular season team. This was kind of like the promise of what it could have been for Yao and McGrady for the regular season, and then Yao was still able to kind of carry that team through to that point and through 3 games of the series. But and even admirable how far they were able to come even after he was injured. But
yeah, it's crazy to look at. I'm looking at the box scores right now. The Rockets Lakers series. So you take Yao Ming out. He only played 3 games. He was of course the leading scorer. You take him out. Their top 3 leading scorers are Aaron Brooks, Ron Artest / Metta World Peace, and Luis Scola. What?
Nice players,
but what? Yeah, but like for a regular season, that's a good decent regular season team. Win 40.
Yeah. But at that point, Metta was he was really good. So
and Brooks played out of his mind too. He had a really really awesome year that year as well. And you had just a really deep bench too. If you look at that team, I think that's the thing that really got him is look at who's on the bench here. So you have Carl Landry, Shane Battier, Kyle Lowry, young Kyle Lowry off the bench, Brent Berry, Chuck Hayes, So you got to really, you have a team that like when you obviously when you add McGrady and you add Yao there, you could see that, wow, this is a very deep team. You lose those two guys, sort of like we're talking with the Clippers, you lose, two of your top guys. It's like, all right, like, then it doesn't look very pretty. But yeah, the fact that they were still able to take it to 7 games against LA is just a remarkable effort. And like, it wasn't just like they squeaked by. I mean, I think looking right now, game 6, they went 95-80. It's like, geez, like that, of course they got trounced in game 7, but hey, that's a valiant effort, guys. Valiant effort.
Yeah.
Aaron Brooks.
It was good. Yeah, it's impressive, Hey, Aaron Brooks is still around, isn't he?
Yeah, he's parlayed it into a lot of
chugging away. And another one in 2009, Kevin Garnett. Now this is a little bit different because Garnett, he was injured during the season, and then he was able to he came back in the 2009 playoffs. They were able to get past the Bulls in a really classic series, but they lost to the Magic in 7 games in the conference finals. I will say that. We talked about this in one of our in our episode on the best starts of the season ever, which is now out of date because of what Golden State did this year. But they had one of the best starts ever. I mean, in record wise and SRS wise, they were even stronger than the 08 team, which was an incredible team. So I do think this really could have really made a huge difference without Garnett, even though it didn't happen in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, like you said there, you look at that, right, what they were doing in the regular season. And yeah, people sort of forget that because I think they didn't repeat. And again, like we live in a world where, championships are how we define everything. But this team was every bit as good as the team the year before. And it seemed like, I remember even the narrative at the time was like, all right, these guys now they like, the first year they were still kind of trying to figure it out and they still won a title. Like now they got it. They know what they're doing. They're figuring out everyone's playing at the top of their level. I remember that being a thing. And Kevin Garnett especially, we sort of, now we think of him as sort of this old decrepit guy. But I mean, he was at this time playing, some of his best basketball that he's ever played. Paul Pierce was at the top of his levels, and Ray Allen was, of course, always fantastic as well. So he really kind of got that. And like you said, I think this one's interesting because he does come back, and it's like, all right, cool. And then it's like, yeah, but it's not that Kevin Garnett. He's averaging 9 a game. He's just not even, he's just not explosive. He looked hurt, and he looked like he wasn't ready to come back. And of course, then he missed, the rest of the season. But yeah, I mean, you look at it, and I think, again, what they did even without him, making it to the Eastern Conference semifinals against the Orlando Magic still sort of speaks to how good that team, was even without Kevin Garnett, and how much better they would have been with what I would call probably their best player that year, Kevin Garnett, who missed time. So yeah, I think absolutely, especially in that season, especially when Orlando was the one, sort of represented in the finals, very good case that they could have made the NBA Finals with Kevin Garnett.
Yeah, absolutely. And then 2010, another bad luck thing for the Celtics. Now, this is Kendrick Perkins, so obviously not on the caliber of player that we normally have been putting on this list, but
that's a big deal. No,
yeah, it really was. I mean, he was injured. He had a torn MCL and PCL, injured his knee, missed the rest of Game 6 of the finals, and then couldn't play in Game 7, obviously. And the Celtics lost this, grinded out game to the Lakers. It was a really ugly game. We talked about it in our Game 7s thing. And the thing that killed the Celtics was rebounding. They couldn't grab a board. Like Rasheed Wallace was toward the end, and he wasn't grabbing him, and Garnett was doing his best, and it was just basically Powell and Bynum and even Kobe with like 16 rebounds in the game, just killing them on the glass, and that was really the reason they lost the series. And in Perkins one thing he could do is rebound, so that definitely was a pretty significant series shifting thing, even though again the caliber of player Kendrick Perkins, and unfortunately the knee injury really kind of. He was an okay, pretty decent player at the time, and then kind of was not much of a player after that. Was sort of lamented as why does Oklahoma City not amnesty him every year when they're trading James Harden and you're wondering why they won't build up get guys for their bench or that kind of thing. So
yeah, no, and of course, like people mentioned, grinded out really ugly game, but yeah, the key was, and I remember even watching it live as it was happening, was that the Lakers were just getting so many rebounds. I mean, you look at offensive rebound percentage, the Lakers 41.8%. So that's like right there. I mean, that's so many second chance points. And when you look at a game that's only 83-79, that's a big deal. I think they out rebounded them by 13 rebounds. Like you said, Kobe had like 16 rebounds. I think Gasol had 18. Odom had 7. Of course, that's not even counting Andrew Bynum, who didn't do a whole lot in that game. So you look at that, and that's really it. Whereas the Celtics had, total rebounds. You got Sheed with 8, as you mentioned, Rondo with 8, and Pierce with 10. But that's not near. I mean, the Lakers just killed him on the rebounding. So yeah, you look at that. You look at a guy that you can point to and say, hey, that's his only discernible skill. Him out, the team sucks at rebounding. There's a case to be made that Kendrick Perkins swung that series. So I think we're well justified in saying that. So
absolutely, yes. And then the last one that we're going to talk about, I guess briefly, although we've gone a little bit.
I was going to say none of these were brief at all, but that's fine. I forgot because I was like, "Oh, we're wrapping up." Oh, wait, we haven't gotten to the ones we wanted to get to yet. Okay, well.
And Kevin Love in 2015. Love was injured in the first round in Game 4, and was sort of battling for a loose ball with Kelly Olynyk of the Celtics, and Olynyk pulled his arm and dislocating his left shoulder, putting him out for the series, and then Irving battled injuries throughout the playoffs, and then had to leave Game 1 against the Warriors with a knee injury, a game that the Cavs actually easily could have won if it hadn't have been for Irving being out. And then the Cavs were able to rally and take a 2-1 lead, but of course the Warriors found their way and won the series 4-2. So, even though the Cavs adjusted pretty well to sort of change their style and make it more grinded out, and really had a very good defense without Love and without Irving, but they were obviously significantly overmatched, even though they had LeBron James still at that point very close to the best player in the world. Steph was coming on that level and a couple other guys in that category, but I think Steph has definitely passed him this year, but in 2015 that was still a discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I guess we should talk about the main part of the subject. So, Rich, what was our criteria here?
Yeah, so our criteria, we were trying to figure it out, you and I, in sort of a chat of saying, okay, how do we define elite? How do we do that? Essentially what we got to is teams with 8-plus SRS, so a team that had an 8 over an 8 simple rating system, which is a basketball prospectus way to rate teams overall. Just gives us a good way to sort of look at that. Also, we looked at if you had 63-plus wins, so maybe your SRS was below that, but you had a ton of wins, 63-plus, or in some cases, because there's one team in particular that, didn't have the 63 wins because of the lockout season, but still had an over 75% win percentage. So we put it at 8-plus SRS, 63-plus wins, and then a 75% or better win percentage. Just to kind of give us teams that we could truly call, like, these are title contending teams. These are among the best teams, in the league that year, and then an injury that happened to them. So sort of working on that criteria to try to slim it down a little bit so we can focus on these guys a little bit more.
Yeah. So 2016, of course, Steph Curry, as we mentioned, suffering a sprained right MCL. The regular season, they were 73-9.
Oh yeah, that's good. That's pretty good. Is that the record? Is that the record or what?
I'll check that. Okay. And we'll let people know in the next show.
Maybe somebody on the Twitter account can let us know if they.
Okay, all right. We'd appreciate that.
Thank you.
The team's regular season SRS was 10.38, which is 6th all time. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen here. They have benefited from some luck with the Clippers injuries that we discussed earlier, so they will either play a weakened Clippers team or a Blazers team that won approximately 30 fewer games than or 28 fewer games, something along those lines, to what the Warriors played. So I would still put the Warriors as the favored team in that situation, even without Steph for at least a few games in the playoffs, if not for the whole series. So they may be able to. They may be able to advance without him, and then if he gets the right amount of rest, and in the conference finals against either the Warriors. So this may not derail their season, but there's definitely it's now much more open than we initially thought it could have been just a few weeks ago.
Absolutely.
So next is 2013 Russell Westbrook and the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I kind of forgot how good this regular season team was for the Thunder, because it was actually after the James Harden trade.
Yes. So they had made the finals the year prior, of course, losing to the Miami Heat. And then it was an idea, again, like we talked about, oh man, this team's, this dynasty's ready to go. Like, these guys made it here. And everybody sort of assumed that was sort of their coming out party. And now it would be the rest. Now it's like, okay, these guys have arrived. Now they're going to, refine it a little bit. We're ready to go. Of course, James Harden gets traded in the offseason, but it doesn't really stop them at all. I mean, the team, they win 60 games in the regular season. Their SRS is a 9.15, which is just, you sort of really do forget how good this 2013 or 2012-2013 Oklahoma City team was. So as I said, they didn't really show any ill effects from the James Harden trade. They went 13-4 in November, 11-2 in December, and 11-5 in January. So right out of the gates, they were still a good team. Of course, Harden broke out on his own right as sort of the leading scorer of Houston, and then they would go and they would face Houston in the opening round of the playoffs, and that's in Game 2 when Russell Westbrook got hurt. You've probably seen this many, many times, but Westbrook veered to the sidelines as he prepared for his coach Scott Brooks to call a timeout. Rockets guard Patrick Beverley came up to him, went for a steal, and bumped into Westbrook. Westbrook immediately crumbled to the ground, holding his knee. People sort of feared the worst, but then Westbrook didn't seem to. It seemed like he hurt, but it wasn't like, oh man, this is done or he's done for the season. He kind of like punched the scorer's table and seemed frustrated. But then he ended up playing, 37 minutes anyway, scoring 29 points, and having a 12 for 26 kind of Russell Westbrook-esque game. And then we found out that he tore his meniscus and that he'd be out for the rest of the playoffs. And it was kind of funny because he had never missed a game prior. He had even mentioned that, not in high school, not in college, never. He had never missed a game. And of course, we know that Russell Westbrook, that next year had a few injury issues as well. Seems to be fairly healthy now, but of course, it was that weird bit of bad luck where a lot of people were worried that was going to be a thing with Russell Westbrook, that he was, not going to be able to hold up to the rigors or whatever. But the Thunder would still defeat the Rockets in 6 games, so they would get to the next round, but then they would fall to Memphis in 5 games, and that was sort of an emerging Memphis team that a little bit of good luck and Zach Randolph becoming sort of the star everybody thought he was going to certainly helped that team as well. But even when you look at Memphis's, defeating of Oklahoma City, the margins were super tight. It was, Memphis won by 6, 6, 6, and 4. And I feel like it's not crazy to say, if you have Russell Westbrook, you probably can make up a few of those, deficits there. But, for perspective as well, their Game 1 victory over Houston was by 29, and that's when they had a healthy Westbrook and a healthy Durant, and the team was, firing on all cylinders. So, you got that there. But, so, the Thunder, they made it to the NBA Finals the prior season. Of course, they were eliminated 5 games here. And then, that's just kind of the story of Westbrook and Oklahoma City. But no fear, they'll be back in a few years, healthy and ready to go, right?
We hope.
I can't.
Hey, maybe look a little better this year after
exactly. Yes.
Golden State troubles, but we'll see. Yeah, obviously they probably would have been helpful to have kept James Harden and for Westbrook getting hurt in the playoffs, but we're not going to relitigate that. But
please do not. Yeah.
No, we don't want to do that
because I'll be here for another hour talking about that.
Yeah, no, we don't need to do that. But this one's tough because the Thunder would have. I think they could have made it past Memphis pretty easily. With, Westbrook. Yeah. Whether they would have been able to beat the Spurs. The Spurs had beaten the Spurs the year before. The Spurs were, I think, a bit of a better team. Obviously, they made the finals and then had that classic 7-game series against the Heat. So for the Heat's second championship, so it's still a pretty tall order to expect the Thunder to have beaten the Spurs and the Heat. It was certainly possible, but and this certainly took away a good chance for them to make that run. But I'm not sure that I feel confident that okay, if they stayed healthy, that would have happened. There's definitely a decent chance of that happening, but I don't know if there's a great chance of that happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a Heat team too that people forget. I mean, this was when they sort of they figured it out. They had it. They were just super efficient. LeBron was just I'd say arguably LeBron's best year as well. Yeah. I mean, he was just locked in. Yeah.
Yeah. That was a 27-game win streak.
Yeah, exactly.
Here. So yeah, that was.
I mean, they were just locked in that entire year. So I mean, that's where you get a little tough. But yeah, I mean, I think it's not wild to say that they would have made the NBA Finals again, and what would have happened there, who knows? But yeah, I think it's a big injury, especially these guys both in their prime, and Kevin Durant sort of having to shoulder the load all on his own. And we know this was a series as well. I think it was against the Memphis where people started to look at him and go, does this guy have it to be a leader of a team? And I remember there was discussion of that at that time, which of course is kind of ridiculous, in hindsight, but. Yeah, I mean, people were sort of ready for him to step up, but you lose two of your three best players from the prior year when you made the finals. That'll there'll be some derailing there, but yeah, of course. Yes. And then they would lose Durant the next year or whatever, and so it. Poor Oklahoma City, or the year after that they would lose him, but for the finals.
Right.
But that's all right.
But still, yes, they've unfortunately they've dealt with a Westbrook or Durant injury pretty much every year, except for this one.
Yeah, but fingers crossed, everything's okay for this year.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
So next we have 2012, the Derrick Rose and Chicago Bulls, and this one's a pretty sad one because unfortunately Rose has never been the same since this injury. I
hadn't noticed, Jason. Thank you for.
And it was a torn ACL, right?
Yes, yeah. This particular one was a torn ACL, and then of course, ever since then, it's just been a litany of additional injuries to different parts of his body. But yeah, the first one was a torn ACL.
Yeah, against the 76ers, and was just basically trying to leap off his left foot, stopped quickly and jumped, and he came down and he grabbed his left knee and fell to the floor, and then was helped off the court. I remember watching this and just being obviously being stunned and being incredibly saddened. And the Bulls were they were the number one seed there that year. They were 50-16. This was the lockout year, and their SRS was a 7.43. So this was definitely a team where they were going to have to go against the Heat, and this was the second year of the of the LeBron Heat, and things had not gone well that first year when in the playoff series. So I'm not necessarily certain they would have made it through Miami again, but this definitely it was probably their best shot because they had a pretty deep and versatile team this year.
Yeah, absolutely. They added Richard Hamilton in the offseason, and though he wasn't, of course, the Richard Hamilton of old, he still gave them, enough of a scoring punch. Because one of the big issues the year prior with the Bulls is that, once they put LeBron on Derrick Rose, and once that happened, the Bulls were kind of like, oh crap, like who takes the ball, who takes shots, who dribbles or whatever, and adding Hamilton was supposed to give them not a guy that can sort of take over a game, but at least another option that if Rose is, shut down by LeBron, that you have other options, you have other guys to go to, you have, other things to do. This
catch and shoot guy.
Exactly. It's sort of been, perfect. If, you double team Rose, you get it to Hamilton, he hits the three or he drives the lane or does whatever. But yeah, they finished, first in the league in SRS, second in defensive rating, and just seemed in general poised to make at least another long run in the playoffs and, and match up with the Heat at least at some level. Would they beat the Heat? Who knows? But they never got to that point because they ended up, of course, losing to the Philadelphia 76ers in that opening round series 4-2. And then, interestingly enough, that resilient Sixers team that sort of got lucky in the first round. They took Boston to 7 games in the second round. And then, so really kind of a decent run by that team that really nobody thought had a chance of even winning a game in that opening round before, Rose went down. But
led by Andre Iguodala.
Yeah.
And then they made the Andrew Bynum trade, and things didn't go
probably went quite well, I'm assuming. But yes. That's when Nick Young was like a semi-serviceable player, correct?
That's right.
Was Nick Young? I think Nick Young was on the Sixers team.
Nick Young was on the team. Yeah.
I always forget that Nick Young Sixers
was
era.
Was Brown on that team too, or was that the next year? We don't.
Yeah, I think he was. Yeah, let's please not look it up. But I believe he was. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just go ahead and
I'll assume we're right on that. But
right.
Yeah, and of course, as you mentioned, things have gone swingingly for Derrick Rose and the Bulls ever since then. Rose has missed the entire next season, bits of the season after with another knee injury, and then the Bulls would continue to compete in the Eastern Conference, make it to the playoffs, but their title window had pretty much closed as far as Derrick Rose being the best player on their team, and now we see them, obviously they missed the playoffs this year and in a big transition period, but this was sort of the death knell for the team, at least for that title window as far as we know it. So, yep. Thank you for depressing me horribly, Jason. So,
it's okay. No problem, Rich. In fairness, we're the one who took the notes for it. So,
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So, Kwame Brown was not on the that year, so at least not on the playoff roster. So, we had Drew Holiday, Lou Williams, Iguodala, Evan Turner, Spencer Hawes, Elton Brand, Thaddeus Young.
This is Kwame Brown's first year with the Sixers this year? Or
Kwame Brown's
12-13. Never mind. That's what I meant. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. I thought he played there more than 1 year, but
there you go.
Golden State Warrior Kwame Brown. What is your favorite Golden State Warrior Kwame Brown memory?
He was in Golden State.
He played 9 games there in 11-12. Yeah. So try to pick just one, but one memory.
Deep dive on that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So the last one, and probably the closest parallel I can think of to this, or one of the closest ones, is 1973. John Havlicek and the Boston Celtics. Havlicek suffered a severely injured shooting shoulder after running blindly into Dave DeBusschere in Game 3 on screen. And he was able to return. He missed Game 4 completely. He was able to return in Game 5, but he basically played on a. He couldn't really lift his right arm, so he was doing everything with. He was right-handed, but he was doing everything with his left hand. And he did actually play pretty well in Game 5. They were able to win that game in Boston, and then actually, even though they didn't play that well in Game 6, they won it in New York. But he and the team ran out of gas in Game 7, and I believe it was the first time that they'd lost in a Game 7 in franchise history. And they were a lot of people forget this, but they were actually a 68-win team, which would have been the second best record of the second best record of all time. That would have tied that mark, I believe. So. So they definitely were a team that had a chance to, were, even though their SRS was not quite that strong, they were 7.35, which was actually only third in the NBA that year behind the Lakers and Bucks. So only 61 expected wins. So their SRS, I think, indicates they're not quite that strong of a team, but they still were an excellent team, and this definitely kind of wrecked their chances to win their first post Russell title. They'd end up winning titles in 74 and 76. The Knicks ended up advancing from the Eastern Conference Finals, going to the finals and facing off, beating a favorite Lakers team in that series for their second championship. But it's sort of an interesting what if is if the Celtics had won here and been able to beat the Lakers, which, even though the Lakers were an aging team, they still were a better regular season team. So I don't think you can automatically assume they would have beaten the Lakers. But if they had been able to win this championship and then had won 3 and 4 years instead of 2 and 3 years, do they get a little bit, I think we're going to look into some of the best teams of the 70s and kind of consider, look at some interesting things about them and kind of consider, which of those teams might have been the best. And, with that third championship in the decade, I think they have a pretty good shot of being considered the dynasty of that decade. And that decade really is missing a dynasty that basically every other decade in NBA history has.
Yeah, we talked about the 70s, of course, and we might talk about them a little bit more coming up.
Maybe, possibly.
I don't know. Maybe if you want to talk about them this summer, I don't know. We'll see. But you look at that, and it's just a weird decade, and we've talked about it many times, where you have like these weird kind of one-off champions. You have, Portland gets their one little run there, which we talked about a little bit earlier. You get Seattle gets their one little run. A bunch of teams have these little tiny micro runs, and there's not that dynasty, and that the NBA is so used to just having dynasty-defined decades, and this one is pretty open. But yeah, I think you make a very good case there, and I think there is a very good case to be made that, with Havlicek at full power, with that Celtics team, that they become sort of the pseudo team of the 70s and become that dynasty that the 70s, doesn't have, for better or for worse. But yeah, I think it's a great case for it. And I think it is probably the best case, to sort of compare to what's going on right now with Steph Curry. Of course, no idea what's going to happen with Curry. We don't know what that the history lies ahead for that. But yeah, I think it's a very good case that this is very similar to that injury and how this really did affect their chances of winning the title. We talked about these other teams where it's like, maybe, I don't know. This one you look at and it's like, yeah, that's a big deal, not having John Havlicek for that team.
And Havlicek, for people who don't really realize, he was like basically like a kind of like a Scottie Pippen level player.
Yeah.
And was one of the best players of that decade. And when he retired, was like really high up on like the all-time great list. A lot of it was because of he played for so long, but I mean, he really was he was a good player statistically, but I think he was just an even greater player with his defense and ability to move without the ball, and just a lot of the a lot of the great things. He won 8 championships for a reason, and in 2 of those he was more than 2 really. I mean, probably the last 5 or so he was either the best player or co-best player on those teams. So he certainly did a lot during his career, but this is sort of an interesting what if. And again, a lot would have had to happen. So we're it's hard to say whether it really swung it. And also, Earl Monroe missed Game 4 with an injury in the series as well. Now, he was not as important of a player to the Knicks as
I don't know about that
as Havlicek was to the Celtics, but lots of things happen in these things. So it's obviously it's it's an exercise. It's revisionist history, as we say. But yeah, it was certainly there was sort of a neat moment here prior to the 4th game in Madison Square Garden. The New York fans actually gave Havlicek a spontaneous standing ovation when he appeared in street clothes, which kind of shows kind of the respect that he had around the league during that time. So anything else, Rich?
I think that's it. We unfortunately went a little bit long on our other stories, but now you got a lot of stories about the history of injuries in the NBA playoffs. But we can't help ourselves sometimes. We do all this research. We want to talk about it. So that's fine. We get excited about the history of the NBA. But no, I got nothing more to add to this one other than fingers crossed that of course injuries don't completely change the playoffs. But in one sense, I do kind of like it every so often when you kind of have this wide open thing. I prefer, as an NBA fan, I prefer when to see, the best players and the best teams winning, but sometimes it's kind of fun to have like a Wild West mentality where it's like, literally a Wild West mentality where it's like, oh crap, like, I don't know then, like maybe this team could win, maybe that team could win, maybe that team goes to the finals. So it'd be interesting to see what sort of ends up happening here. But the fingers crossed that Curry does come back, because of course I'd rather, Curry and the Warriors do have a chance, but we've already seen, with the Clippers, they're losing too. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes and how Golden State does react without him, if they fall apart, or if they at least kind of stay afloat until he comes back, and what he's like when he comes back as well. Team. So yeah, I think that I feel like they can at least. I mean, the big thing is going to be if and when they face the Spurs. That will be the big test there, because that's
or even the Thunder.
Yeah. The Thunder. I mean, this could finally be the time for the Thunder to go, you know what, basketball gods, you screwed us before, but we're going to take this one. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But yeah, it makes the playoffs a tinge more exciting. It sucks, kind of in a morbid way. It took injuries, but there's some fun now of this. Or hey.
Right, yeah. I mean, no one wants an injury, but the unpredictability makes it interesting. Yeah. Even though I generally like the best teams to,
me too,
to win in that.
But every so often, you can have one year where it gets a little crazy, right? That's fine.
Yeah, yeah, it's right. So as long as everyone is healthy in the long term, that's the
of course. Yeah.
Hopefully that will be the case for everyone. But. All right, well, thanks everyone for checking us out. Of course, you can find us at hardwoodparoxysm.com. You can find our podcast over and back on iTunes or Stitcher. If you would leave us a rating and a review, we would absolutely adore that. We would be very happy, and it would make us smile for days, in fact. So, only a good rating. If a bad rating, then we will frown for days. You don't want that, so... and so you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at Over and Back NBA. So until next time, thanks for listening, and we're back again soon.